Well, thank you, Diana, and thank you, Adam, for being here. We have known each other for a long time, and I hope to probe you quite deeply this afternoon. So I'm an admirer of all your books, and we're not going to be able to cover all of them in the time we have. So I think I'll start with Mothers and Sons and hope that we can talk about Imagine We Gone and Union Atlantic, and also your fantastic first book collection of stories, You Are a Stranger Here. You are not a stranger here. This shows how much I know. Anyway, Mothers and Sons, who are there are many mothers and sons in this book, but the focus is on a mother and a son in particular, and then that story radiates out to other people. Tell us who the son is first, and then who the mother is, and that's sort of following the structure of the book, which is also something I want to talk about.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for being here to do this, and thank you to Amanda and Sarah and everybody and the sponsors. It's really very good to be here. So I appreciate the invitation. So the son, the main son in the book is Peter Fisher, who's an immigration lawyer living in New York, and he represents asylum seekers. So the book's set in 2011. So in the Obama administration, and put simply, he's a workaholic. He is someone who, as I think a lot of people in the helping professions can be, someone who spends all of his psychic and mental energy with those he's trying to help, right? And so he takes the work home. He's always working on these briefs and interviews and in court with the I almost said patients, with the clients. So in a way, he's very cut off from himself, right? He's focused on other people, but he's a bit cut off from himself. And he's estranged from his mother, who I'll describe in a minute. But the question of the book is, in a sense, why are the two of these people estranged, right? And his mother was an Episcopal priest, but left the priesthood to form a women's retreat center with two of her closest friends, one of whom is her partner, and that's up in Vermont. So the book toggles between these two places and people who really aren't at all close.
Right.
So those are the main mother and son.
Yes, there's a wonderful phrase. The center that she has in Vermont, a ministry of hospitality.
Yes.
But about Peter, you say that he's cut off from himself in a lot of ways, but he's also, in being an immigration lawyer, he is fashioning stories for these people and drawing their own stories out of them, and then telling them or retelling them in briefs, etc., as narratives that maybe they haven't formed themselves. So if you could talk a bit about the importance of storytelling narrative, how each character begins to think about themselves, and then we'll get into how you think about those things.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that fascinated me about... So I went to law school many years ago. I never practiced as a lawyer, but I know a lot of my good friends are lawyers, and a number of them immigration lawyers. And one of the things about, particularly an asylum claim, is that you have to take some of the most painful things that have ever happened to someone in another country, and then with talking to the client, draw out of them the facts of this event and the documentation of it and so on, but then put it into a shape that the court understands. So at one point I say in the book, his job is to sort of whittle people's stories down into the shapes that the law can see, And so he spends a lot of his time doing that, and becomes aware of some of the sort of ambiguities of when you're working with someone, they don't want to be reliving these most difficult things that they've been through. And particularly one client, this young Albanian man, he's reluctant in some way. He's trying to get on with his life, but he also needs to do this case. And so Peter gets more and more pulled in to trying to do the best he can by this guy who's not fully participating in some ways.
Well, and there's also the level of having a translator involved in many of these things, where either they're more artful in the storytelling than the immigrant is, him or herself, because they know what will work, and yet it's another medium through which the lawyer Peter has to grasp these stories. There's one great line where you said about this young Albanian man that he needs his version of the story. He's not getting it.
Yes, exactly.
But the mother, Anne, what was behind your decision, if you can remember, or if it always was this way, that there are two different narratives going on? So there's Peter writing in the first person, or you've written Peter's narrative in the first person, present tense, and then we shift to Anne's story narrative, which is in the third person, past tense. And so can you talk about how you came to that and what purpose it had for you at the beginning when you came upon it?
Well, so originally I thought I was going to write the book entirely from Peter's point of view. And for me, as I said, him being cut off from himself, he's also in a way dissociated, not in a clinical sense of not being able to function, but he's just not looking at a lot of things. There are a lot of things he's not looking at. And I think present tense first person is in many ways the tense and the person of someone who's dissociated. They can't see the past. They're just in a kind of, it's just dealing with this stuff in front of you. You know what I mean? You're not looking backwards. You can't narrate in some sense. Whereas Anne, as I came to think of her, is really a kind of third person kind of person. She's a past tense kind of person. She's someone who's taking in at this women's retreat, women are coming to meet with these other three women to talk about their lives, talk about their spiritual lives, their career paths, their way in the world. And so she's sort of drenched in people's interior life and their past, and they're making sense of these things. And so narrating her character, she's just more ordered, and so a past tense third person is much more orderly, whereas Peter's just caught up in his mind. So those were the reasons for those sort of technical choices.
Well, there's this wonderful, you say how she is in the past and she's helping these other people come to their stories. There's this wonderful thing. The novel begins, or her part of the novel begins with her beginning her morning meditation, etc., at this center, her private time in this studio she has, and she's trying to let go of her thoughts. I mean, which she refers to as, her feelings are stray thoughts, and then there's a parenthetical phrase, or between dashes, that thinking about her daughter and all the questions that her daughter asks her about their family history, and then about her son, and you think, okay, this is what she's trying to rid herself of, because these possessions sort of get in the way of her own story, and then you realize, well, what you've put between the dashes are the life stories of these other people that she's trying to shed. I mean, it's like if she can get free from those stray thoughts. The stray thoughts are her children's lives.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I wanted to get at in telling her story, and she says this to Peter at one point later in the book, is that, and so in 2011 she's probably around 70-ish or so, so that generation, and she says to him, I am not only your mother. You know what I mean? I'm a person in addition to that. And I needed to do these things. You know what I mean? I needed to do these other things in my life. And in a sense, a very sentimental view of a mother-child relationship would say that was harsh. But it's also sort of a reality of feminism, right? I mean, is that you're not totalized by being a mother, right? That's not the only role she had. And so, there's a push and a pull, complicated by the fact that when she left Peter's father rather, became ill and then eventually dies, not far into the book. Her next partner is a woman,
right.
So she's sort of moving on in a different way,
Well, and another change in her life is not only not being a minister and then moving to this, but the different kind of prayer that's important to her. I mean,
yes.
Moving from a religious view of the world to a more spiritual view of the world.
Yeah. So she was an Episcopal minister, which some would say is as close to non-religious as you can get. But
you should meet some Reformed Jews.
Yeah. So my uncle once said, "How many Episcopalians does it take to screw in a light bulb?" And the answer was 1 to make the martinis and 1 to call the electrician. So in any case, she goes up and she's still a spiritual person, but it's more a practice of meditation and I don't know, New Age isn't quite the word, but a sense of universalism, transcendentalism, more than Christianity at that point.
I mean, she says, why did I mean, this is my repeating of your better words, but why did I pray so often for thanks for God giving man dominion over the earth? I mean, that she has a different prayer.
Yeah, indeed.
But at the beginning of Peter's story, you say here, I mean, and you say in the novel, obviously, what happens when he meets this young Albanian immigrant who has fled, it seems, some kind of gay bashing or pain as being a gay person in Albania. And one of his colleagues in this firm that they have, this nonprofit firm, says, you can't let the client's story get under your skin.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the engine of the whole novel, is that it does. So can you say what without telling all the details of the spoilers, exactly why this person speaks to him in so many ways, just the shadows of his story before he even really knows it? Yeah,
well, I think it's because he starts talking what Bill's referring to in terms of his family. He's living in rural Albania, very traditional culture, and so the idea of any kind of romance between boys, is totally verboten. So a rumor starts to spread that this has happened, and in fact he has this, crush on this boy. And so I think him starting to tell this story, which is the story that, as I said at the beginning, Peter needs to figure out which parts of this are relevant legally and be able to put them down and all of this. He, in trying to get Vasil, which is the guy's name, to tell this story, almost without thinking about it, sort of involuntarily, memories of his own begin to percolate, right? And those are memories, the kinds of things he hasn't really been looking at. And they are about, in fact, himself when he was an adolescent, and falling in love with a boy when he was an adolescent. And then what I was trying to do in writing it was to give the reader some experience, without them thinking about it, of seeing a little piece and then forgetting it. Because you go back into the courtroom, you go back into what they're doing, you go back into his mother, and then another little piece. You know what I mean? So it's being reassembled a little bit for the reader as it's being reassembled in Peter's mind. Well, there's this, you do that wonderfully. I mean, I hadn't realized quite what was happening in that way to me, but he's sitting in, I guess, the anteroom of the courtroom, and or some municipal building, and he notices the plastic molded back chair. So it's almost like kind of Proustian chair rather than a Madeline that he
begins to remember the chairs that were in his high school.
Yeah.
And you say that he begins to think of Jared, or he's thought of Jared, this boy he loved, who he had not thought of in he couldn't remember how long, or something like that. And when I read that, I thought, oh, I think he probably has thought about him more frequently than, it hasn't like all of a sudden recurred to him. But just that sense of his psychology, even as he's thinking about it, distancing himself from his own thoughts in that way, was really very moving.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Seemed to reveal something about him, especially since he's had an encounter with a kind of friend with benefits. I mean, there are other phrases that I can't use in Charleston for that kind of. I don't know if they call it the same thing down here. We might in New York, but this friend with benefits, she said, well, who he's known for a few months, and he said, well, you could tell me something about yourself. And Peter thinks he has told him enough, and he said, okay, you can remain a mystery. So the mystery begins to unravel for us, even if it's not for this man. That was very interesting. And then also I guess this was another way in which Peter, you say, disassociates. He was listening to a colleague, Monica, I think is her name. She's going on a ski trip, and she's going to be driving up, and he thinks, oh, she's going to be driving further north past my mother's retreat center. And so these things that he's not thinking about are actually very much on his mind. So that is very carefully done. When you're writing, do you do those things accidentally, inspirationally? Do you have to come back and put those little clues in? I mean, or did you know that Monica was going to go?
I'm sort of I kind of inch forward. I'm not someone who outlines or has a sense of. I mean, I have some global sense of where it's going, but I don't outline as I go. So it's very much beginning every day by editing what I wrote the day before and seeing what's there and trying to carry on. And so I think some of those things I come back and you see, oh, I want to plant a little bit of this here. But a lot of it has to do for me with the rhythm of the sentences, the music in the prose. So getting back to what you said about writing the mother in third person and the Peter in first person, that also has a lot to do with the musical argument of the book, in a sense, right? Because I think we love the books that we love not because of the plots, right? I mean, you could press a book on someone and say, you must read this book, and they'll say, well, what's it about? And you could say, well, it's a car dealer in Kansas, you know what I mean? Like, well, maybe I want to read that book, maybe I don't. But it might be the prose, might be the rhythm of the prose, might be something that told you about what it's like to be alive, and that's what you're pressing on someone, right? And so to me, my main task as an artist is to create the musical argument in a book that's going to compel people beyond just the story that could be summarized.
And so in this book, did you see it as a kind of duet, I mean, or contrapuntal?
With the two of them, And so, in some ways, there's I sometimes talk to other writers about the idea that you can have a plot resolution to a book, but you can also have a kind of musical resolution, right? There can be the shift in the tone can tell you as much about where the people have arrived as I say, like the news story of the book.
I mean, when people ask me about books and they say, well, what's it about? I always feel like, well, this is reducing it to like two sentences. I mean, and then it's so unfair. But the more I read over my life, not only the prose, but the structure of a novel seems crucial to the great books. I mean, that there is some decided structure that you have an emotional reaction to as a reader that is engaged with the prose, but has the ingeniousness of the structure, even if it's a very simple structure, is what makes a novel great. Yes, the form of a novel. And that it can be gripping without having a structure. So it then is less memorable to me than a novel that is really carefully structured in some way that might be invisible as
Yeah.
it's happening, but then you sort of take it in later.
Hopefully almost invisible. Yeah.
So in talking about mothers and sons, one of the things you said is that when Anne says, well, I wasn't only your mother, I was thinking, well, if only our mothers could say that to us when we were about 6 and we could understand that, it would save a lot of people a lot of emotional problems and psychological problems, because Peter and Liz, his sister, and in life, so many people come to that realization or begin to have that realization as a child, and that's where so much pain begins. I guess there wouldn't be psychoanalysis without it, but but that misunderstanding of who people are, that's certainly a theme in this book, that you just can't grasp who people are because you can't know what they're thinking or doing. And Peter is always wondering about his friend Jared, this boy he loved. What's really going on here? He can't read people. Mm-hmm. So,
yes, I think the perception of others, also the ways that people's internal the stories they tell themselves barely consciously, right? We all have stories running in our heads, little narratives that are kind of with us every day. They could be about very incidental things or about deeper, bigger things. And to me, getting at a character is always trying to find what that internal monologue is. And in this book in particular, I think I was aware of how those stories we're telling also are the things that are projected outwards, that, well, this person is this way, and that you fix people in certain places. You have an idea for them, a sort of shortcut. And then how distorting that is, of a life. And they're different, in a way. One of the ironies, I think, of the work that each of these, Anne and Peter are doing, is that they're trying for other people to give room for their stories to in very different worlds, but they're trying to give people the chance to narrate and integrate their experience. But while they're doing that for others, they are also in some ways failing to do it for themselves
and for each other. That's one of the climate. The climate. Without saying what actually happens, but when they are talking to one another, eventually, it's a question of belief or not belief. What Peter what has happened to Peter when he was a teenager and what he is struggling with now is also a story that he told her, which perhaps was very close to the actual truth. We can know that. And she shapes it in a particular way, almost incidentally, and tries to move on.
To protect him. To protect him. In her view, to protect him, yeah.
And his I don't know if it's rage, I guess it is, but by the end, that she didn't believe him.
Yeah.
And yet she's attuned in all of the work that she's done to believing what people say. He's been attuned to trying to believe what people say, and that fundamental disbelief that she had seems like such a betrayal of her both religion and her role as a mother.
Yeah. Well, we were saying in the green room that one of the strange coincidences.
Yes.
One of the strange coincidences that what he's referring to is this boy that Peter, as a teenager, was in love with, suffers a very grave concussion, physical, literal, and in my tour of Charleston over the weekend, which was greatly aided by Ted Lee, who I believe is here. I had a culinary tour. I got to North Charleston, by the way. I got to the Chinese barbecue up in North Charleston. I had a concussion this morning. Okay, and so my tour included MUSC. which I can tell you was wonderful. And I told them when I went in, I said, I'm due on stage at 1 o'clock. So, can we make this short? And they said they could.
The show must go on.
The show must go on. So here I am, in any case.
Yes, so that was quite an astonishing life imitating
Yes.
art, although luckily it wasn't a rock
Without
in
the
a river.
same consequence. Yes.
So,
yes.
but
So
yes,
far.
it's a very unusual way of seeing Charleston and being able to imagine
Yeah.
what it would be like to live here.
Yes. They thought that I had gotten drunk on the cobblestones, but I had not, to be clear.
Well, at least that's the story you told.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a narrative they could make sense of,
Yeah.
that you had not fallen. I just want to say about Ted Lee, that is an old connection that Adam and I discovered that we had. As Diana said, I write about books and interview authors, and when Adam's novel Union Atlantic was published in 2009, I was invited to the publishing party, and the reason I remember that is that when I took the book down to prepare for this, there was the invitation to the party at your publisher's house on the Upper East Side. And when I was there, I saw your college roommate, and wasn't he?
No, Iowa Writers Workshop.
Oh, Iowa
classmate.
Writers. Okay,
Yeah.
so. Ted was there, and I said, well, what are you doing here? And it turns out you had gone to school with him, and he had been my assistant when I was an editor at Scribner, and I hadn't seen him in about 15 years.
Yes.
So it was really quite wonderful to
Yes.
find Ted there and to see Ted wave in the
Yes,
audience
yes.
and drawings.
Well, I said I was in town for a festival, and they're like, the food festival? It's like, no, that's Ted's festival. I'm here for the literary festival.
Overlapping festivals.
Yes, exactly.
Overlapping festivals.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about the structure of novels and somehow trying to convey, character in the musical language of your of your writing. Can you talk a little bit about your last novel, Imagine Me Gone? Because that, too, has a very this is a straightforward but ultimately complicated structure with the voices and the tenses. And that's even more so in the sense of getting inside the mind of a character who might not see from the inside, who doesn't seem to us, once we learn the inside, what he looks to other people like from the outside. You're
talking about Michael.
Yeah.
So Imagine Me Gone is a book, my last novel, which is about a family and has a lot to do with mental illness, and a father who suffers from depression and a son who suffers from anxiety. And Michael, the son, is a very, he's a very brilliant wit. He's got a huge amount of humor in him. And I had to find a way to get that on the page because it would have been unfair and just wouldn't have represented what I had in mind and my own brother. There's a lot of autobiography in the book. And so I eventually landed on the idea of forms that he would parody. So a doctor's intake form, which instead of being routine, runs to 30 pages and just has all sorts of rather absurdist answers. So when it asks medical history, his response is yes.
Is that what you said this morning?
That's what I said this morning, exactly. A student loan repayment form that turns into an entire diatribe. So it's a way of getting obliquely at a lot of his state, and also by the music, that prose is very energetic and kind of absurdist. You get at his humor in a more direct way. But each of the characters in that book, there are 5 different members of the family, I was thinking through the voices and the rhythm of the prose. My sister's also in the audience, so I have to acknowledge that.
Oh, I thought you said, so you have to be careful.
Yeah, well, yes. Indeed.
But did she read the book and think, you're not capturing anything about...
You'll have to ask her that afterwards.
Afterwards.
Yes.
You referred to the fact that the novel is set in 2011. And
This book.
This book, yes,
Yeah.
Mothers and Sons. Sorry to jump
Yeah.
back. That's... Reading it, I read it in the winter. I mean, it was published earlier this year. And rereading it for this talk, the context in which I read it had changed remarkably in the last 10 months, because it is about immigration, and there are scenes in courtrooms where, either ICE is referred to, or the Department of Homeland Security is arguing for the government. And it's a very sad process in 2011, but it almost seemed genial and courtly and compared to what is happening now. I mean, in the sense that even the government lawyers are abiding by courtroom procedure. I mean, as frustrated as they are. So can you talk a little bit about what was important to you in getting that story of immigrants down, and why 2011 was such why you decided to set it then?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things. I mean, in writing about the immigration system, you don't have to wait until 2016 or 2024 to talk about a broken system, right? There hasn't been legislation since the 1980s. The system is broken. Everybody agrees on that. And so, in that sense, many of the dynamics and the things we've been talking about in terms of how, they were there. And it's also true that Obama, still to this day, more people were deported in his administration than Trump has deported yet, right? I mean, mass deportation really began under the Obama administration with different classes of people, right? They were focusing on people with criminal records, and now it's sort of whoever they can catch, right? So I think, to me, so in a sense, I didn't need, for the purposes of getting at putting people in the shoes of an immigration lawyer, the psychic work that they're doing. It's turned up to 11 now, but was the same then. And then, frankly, also the idea of putting, our current president on the page did not excite me.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, and you had finished the book before the election.
Well, yes, and it just sort of, I was like, enough things, life, he's swallowed a lot of our lives. Do you know what I mean? I thought he doesn't have to swallow my novel. In that sense, seems like it would have been a distraction. But but at this point, we're suffering just a breakdown of law and order at the federal level, right? So, and the very courtrooms that I was sitting in when I was observing and doing the research for the book are the courtrooms where people are now being detained out of the courtroom itself.
So what was the research that you did? You said earlier, and I knew you had gone to law school.
Yeah.
Why did you go to law school, and then why did you not practice law?
Well, law school was fun, but I thought practicing law might not be. So, and also I published my first book when I was in law school, and so there was sort of a fork in the road, because I think I had this idea of like, oh, I'll work as a lawyer and then write in the evenings or something, but working as an attorney in New York, that's all you're doing. So I didn't practice, but I did years ago, well before I ever thought I would write about it, do some intake work for the Legal Aid Society, where I was going into immigration detention facilities. This is back in like 2002 or 3, and just meeting these people and taking in the very beginnings of their stories as just a volunteer. And then when I started thinking that I would write about it, because I just thought about it more and more, and it is the defining political issue of our time, to state the obvious thing, right? Not just in this country, right? European politics, totally shaped by the issue of immigration, right? Refugee politics, I mean, just around the globe, immigration and the displacement of peoples is and will continue to be the defining issue of how societies cope with what's happening. And so I wanted to write about that in some way. Then to lose my thought, I thought to myself...
He did have a concussion.
No. So what was the second part of that question?
Well, the research. Oh, why you didn't...
So the research. So then I started sitting in on the immigration hearings, which are open to the public. Luckily, I got in there right before the pandemic, or for 6 months or so before the pandemic, so before it all closed down. And what struck me was, unlike in the other helping professions, you know, if you're a therapist or a priest or a social worker, you're there really sort of trying to talk to the whole person, you know, or be with the whole person. You walk into an immigration court, these stories that are really traumatic stories, these very traumatic and violent events, they go like this through the, you know, it's like a meat grinder, right? They're just, the whole way the whole thing is dealt with is, it's not about a kind of more holistic approach to someone's life. And so that was kind of like a bit of a shock. I mean, naive on the one hand, and so sitting in the courtroom and seeing the language, the lawyer's language that's used to wrap it all up. So that's what gave me the language to do Peter in the courtroom scenes, where it's very, there's a harshness to it, you know.
Well, there are some wonderful, I mean, wonderfully done. I mean, they're not always emotionally uplifting, but wonderfully done interactions between him and the judge and the Department of Homeland Security lawyer, the conflicts that Peter has with the government lawyers, and the depictions of them, I mean, are really, you know, marvelously done without making you feel that you're getting lost in the procedure of it.
No, I thought a lot about that, how to get people to be inside it without being kind of caught up in research.
And was that also then to make it happen in that kind of dialogue or setting the scene? I mean, are you having to cut out a lot of stuff that you might have thought was going to give a sense of the reality of those places, but actually the dialogue that does it in the end is different from what you heard in the courtroom?
Yes. I mean, I always think when I'm writing dialogue in fiction, it's behavior. You know what I mean? It's not information. It's how you say something, and the tone of voice, and whether you're interrupting or whether you're whispering, or, you know, and you learn so much about people and their behavior as much as what they're actually saying. So when I'm doing those scenes, I'm always thinking about how is what's being said, what's trying to be done with what's being said, what's trying to be accomplished. Yeah.
So you didn't practice law, but you do practice creative writing teaching. I mean,
I do.
You do that at Hunter College. And so in teaching writing and having, you know, some of what you've said here would be advice perhaps, or ways of teaching. Do your students follow your ideas on dialogue or structure, or the lesser importance of plot? And how do you, as a professor and as a reader of their work, judge them differently from how you might judge what you want to do on the page?
Well, I'm just thinking one of my colleagues at Hunter is Megha Majumdar, who was just a finalist for the National Book Award, and she teaches, she's like plot. Like, I mean, she's very, very good on plot, and very presses them to, you know, be very, very exact. And I'm like, well, what does the sentence sound like? You know? So we're hopefully giving them different things, but you don't want anybody to become you, right? You're just there as a model and a guide and a kind of somewhere along the path, you know. So you're just trying to make them better editors of their own work. And so different people will do that in different ways. But the last thing you want to do is to try to write books like me, you know. And
are you a good editor of your work? I mean, you said how you write very sort of incrementally almost, I mean, without knowing
Yeah.
necessarily what will happen. I mean, that you read each day what you wrote before. I mean, do you need outside eyes?
I do by the end. I mean, I have a wonderful editor, Ben George, at Little Brown, who's incredibly detailed. Like, there's barely a page or a paragraph that doesn't have red marks on it during the editorial process. So I feel very lucky to have that buttress, towards the end. But I mean, really, when I'm doing that inching forward, and it takes years to write a book, the writing is the editing, right? I mean, there are sentences, you know this, I mean, there are sentences you've written 25 times by the time you put it into the world. And so I think editing is the writing.
I mean, before we go to questions from the audience in a minute, I wanted to say that one of the reasons I particularly loved and was so moved by and engaged is too small a word by the story, the issues between Anne and Peter, is that in writing a book, as I am, about Larry Kramer. So Larry Kramer obviously became an AIDS activist. His mother worked for the Red Cross for all of his childhood, and eventually when he was about 10 began to work full-time. They lived in Washington. He was born in 1935. So she went to work for the Red Cross. She volunteered a lot during the war at the Stage Door Canteen and things like that. And then she worked until I think she retired in 1960. And as Larry complained for the rest of his life, she was the greatest ma in the world, to the rest of the world, but not to him. And then he was startled to realize in the 80s that basically his entire life had been shaped by his mother's devotion to the Red Cross and the example that she set. So in the same way here that Peter is looking to serve, but in so many ways rejecting and running from and being distant from anything that his mother represented, partly out of disappointment and rage, and I mean, he doesn't express his rage as Larry Kramer did. But the way parents shape our lives, even when we are trying to do everything not by their example, is really quite astounding.
Yes, indeed.
So
I don't think anybody in the audience knows anything about that, but you'll have to explain.
Everyone is so well adjusted in Charleston, that, One New York thing that I also loved about this book is so we get the way you build characters in this. Monica and Carl are two colleagues of Peter's in this nonprofit, and in the first paragraphs that you have about both of them, one we learn lives in a rent-controlled apartment, and the other lives in a rent-stabilized apartment. And I realized that so much about living in New York is based on affordability, and without those apartments, they would never be able to do the work that they are actually doing.
Yes.
So,
Indeed. Yeah.
advice for the new mayor.
Yes, advice for the new mayor.
Well, Adam, thank you very much for this. Thank you for soldiering through with your head injury. And thank you. It could have been like a Stephen Crane kind of red badge of courage. But now we will take questions from the audience, and I hope you'll all be gentle and gentle on Adam's head. And if you will wait for the microphone and then also make your question a question, we would appreciate it.
I've got one down here, I think.
Here?
Yes.
And Ted, you have to ask an embarrassing question.
Did anything happen to you that precipitated this idea of writing about a mother and a son?
I Googled mothers and sons and said, what's it all about? I asked AI.
Why this topic?
Yeah. Well, so one thing I didn't say to Bill when he asked was that the mother in this story isn't actually really based on my mother, but is based on the mother of my best friend from high school, whose life bears some and a good amount of resemblance, not complete, but did found a women's retreat center in Vermont and so on. And I think you know how obviously your own family of origin, where you know the relationships most deeply and most intuitively and from the farthest back. But after that, this is someone I've known since I was, a young teenager, in and out of the house, knew the mother, knew the sister, knew all the, you get to know a family in a way that's just very granular and detailed. And I think as a writer, for me at least, there's a sense in which I want to be able to go as deep into character as I can, and I can do that most when a lot of the aperturances and the other things around are things that I know, and so the interior life of this woman isn't the interior life of my friend's mother, but I borrowed the world of her exterior life in a way. And the subject matter, I suppose I'm a son and I had a mother. I mean, it's a sort of universal thing. I think there was something in writing about it. I thought about what are the differences between the cross, the mother-son and the father-daughter, like the different parental relationships across gender that have, that you can't generalize because there's millions, billions of variations on these stories. But I write a lot about families and a lot about people who are seeking to be more intimate or closer than they feel that they are or can be, right? They're moving. My characters are often moving towards intimacy, perhaps from places of alienation towards intimacy.
Was this always the title, Mothers and Sons?
Yeah, I got this title early. Often I don't, but this title came early. Yeah.
Other questions? Oh, here.
There's in the front row.
In the front row?
Yeah.
If you'll stand and give me the mic. Okay. So I have a question about your question. And I'll try to be opaque about it just in case folks haven't finished the book. When you said that Peter was really angry and crushed and kept thinking about how his mother didn't believe him and that went contrary to her profession, I didn't read it that way. I read it...
Please, tell me, yeah.
I read it that she believed the facts that he said, did not believe the conclusion that he drew from that. And that seemed to me to be a very loving, motherly thing to do. I may be biased towards the mother because I'm one, but that's how I read it.
Well, I'm a son and not a mother, so
Yeah.
no, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, no, and I think one of the things that I went back and forth with my editor a lot is in this sort of crucial scene that comes where there's this violence between the boys, is how much how to tilt the reader's sense of what's happening in that moment. I think the thing about the story is that both are true, right? I mean, they're true for each of those people. It's also true that Peter feels enormous shame, and so he concludes has the worst possible sense of it. And it's also true that his mother is scared for him, and a little bit for herself, for the consequences. And so they a little bit like lawyers they have their same facts, and yet they both have strong needs to read it in different ways. And in many ways, you're hitting right on it. The book kind of turns on how they each need to tell that story, and the ways in which she, at that point, as the parent, in a sense, has more control over the storyline, right? And she kind of instructs Peter on this is the story. Yeah. Yes.
Here.
Mr. Lee.
Oh, is there?
Yes.
And then.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Billy.
You'll be next.
Okay.
It's so great to have you both in my hometown. It's a total thrill. The question for Adam is, I'm about a third of the way through the book, and was so thrilled that Billy asked about the research, because I think you do such a great job of creating the environment of the courts
Yeah.
and the lingo, and in a way that's engaging and fleet, and to me it was like news from another planet.
Yeah.
Which I remember in school Ethan Kanan talking about that, like if you can bring someone into a world and do it engagingly, it's incredible. And obviously I didn't continue on in fiction writing. It's funny how you were both in my life at a very important point. Working for Billy taught me that, and it wasn't because of you, Billy, it was because of where we worked, that I did not want to work in publishing. And being at Iowa made me realize I really didn't want to be a fiction writer. I didn't have the attention for it, the solitude, the concentration. I was too ADD, and so I went into food journalism. But I really love the lessons that I feel like I learned there. And whenever I say I went to school for fiction writing, people are like, well, you can't teach fiction writing.
Yeah.
Do you look back on that time and think that you learned things there, or was it more about having the time to write and the space to write and being in a community of writers?
Yeah, I think when I went at first, I had low expectations and thought, like what you're saying, well, you can't teach people how to write. And that I would just have time. If nothing else, I would have more time to write, and so that would be worth it. But then, I mean, as you know, we were there. Marilyn Robinson I was reading Milton and Melville with Marilyn Robinson. So I mean, my mind in terms of literature was being expanded. And then I think, to speak about editing, which is what I think you can in some ways teach, it just sped up those processes, right? Because when we're in a workshop together and we're reading each other's work, you're seeing much more easily than you can see it in yourself all these things that other people are doing, and you're like, oh God, I do that too, and it's every week and it's being pointed out, and so I think in a sense it just speeds along the ability to be a little more objective and a little less sentimental about your own work and be able to cut or do these things. So yeah, again, it's not like someone stands up and says this is how you do it, but you're surrounded by people taking it seriously. And I feel like we lucked out. They were good people. It wasn't terribly competitive. It didn't have a competitive spirit to it. So, I'm very glad for having been there. Yeah.
And of course, Ted, I didn't want to work in publishing either. I ended up leaving, shall we say, and you stayed behind, at least for a little while. But yes, I think we're both very happy not doing what we used to do. So I'm glad that could be a lesson to you.
I think there's a question here.
Yes, we have time for, I think, two more questions. Okay. This woman here in the third row.
Yes.
Fourth row.
Yeah.
Hi. So I also wrote a book dealing with immigration, and in the same period, and sort of have done some of that, similar research work around that time of going, for me, I don't have a legal background, but going with the New Sanctuary Coalition, sitting in the courts, and really felt the same thing of these like deeply traumatic stories being, going through them rapid fire. And, but also, as I was working on that book, felt this deep tension which made its way kind of as a defining element into the story that I see in your book as well, which is the tension between sort of action, engagement, and contemplation. Mm-hmm. And now we're at level 11 of this crisis, and I'm wondering, you've got this mother character who ostensibly is in a world of deep contemplation, meditation, and the son character who is in a world of deep action, go, do, take care of others, and yet both of them are kind of missing these central aspects of dealing with their own life stories. So how do you see that tension as a thread in the book, and then in your own life, like in this time that we're in, how are you navigating that tension between contemplation that's so necessary for writing a book and action?
Yeah, it's a tough question. To take the second part first, I think, I'll just be very honest. so much of what's going on is designed to dysregulate everybody. It's to dysregulate the political system, to dysregulate the ability to respond to it, and to dysregulate people psychically. I was struck by the guy who's the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Voigt, said he wants his opponents, the people he wants them to wake up in trauma, right? So that's a deep statement. So I think that it is centrally important to be aware of that and to actually keep one's feet on the ground for things that may be coming, right? So in addition to doing things like, engaging in political activity and contributing and doing what I can in that sense, I am aware of the sense, and for my students as well, of like kind of grounding in the practices that are things that need to be ongoing, that need to be the social and intellectual life, that if you just spend the rest of your days reading the headlines, these things will disappear, right? Like the practices themselves that we say we're defending will disappear if you don't practice them, right? So, which is not a kind of put your head in the sand and just do what you've been doing, but it is to say that that kind of grounding, and it's in so much of the media environment on both, is to just works against that, right? And as far as in the book, I mean, I think it's a lot of what Bill and I spoke about, which is that they're both people who, if you don't keep track of that over time, has sort of external consequences for other people, right? He eventually becomes, by the end of the book, for some of his other clients, kind of a bad lawyer, right? Because he's falling apart a bit. So I think a lot about what can you do to help the people who are on the front lines of doing the work, because those people need help as much as the people who are, actually suffering it, because otherwise there'll be no one there. So there's no good answer, but that's what I can say. Yeah.
Are you, as a professor at CUNY at City University of New York, facing some of these questions in a more potent way than, I mean, they're affecting every college.
Yeah, I mean, knock on wood at the moment, not so much. I think, we're not being directly targeted at the moment. So, yeah, they seem aware of the issues, and so.
Another last question?
Yes, here on the aisle.
I can shout it if that's okay.
Okay. Oh, here you go.
You mentioned that this book was not based on your own mother, which she's probably grateful for. I think all mothers are grateful not to be in books. But I was wondering, what, if anything, did you learn about yourself through writing this book personally, even though it wasn't based on you?
Yeah. Well, I didn't say Peter wasn't based on me. I said the mother wasn't based on my mother. I think there's always emotional autobiography, even when there isn't literal. So, this is about, I never practiced as an immigration attorney, but I think I do. I mean, sometimes people will say, is that really true? But for me, certainly in the last two books and this one, there is a cathartic aspect to it. And I think I wrote this book particularly about a gay man who was alienated from his own, desire and sense of self in the world. And I'm kind of a method writer. I try to occupy the emotional states that my characters are in. And so for a couple of years, I was really kind of having to spend time in a rather closed off headspace that he was in. And I think in some ways the book, writes him out of that in some way. I mean, he does emerge from that level of isolation that he begins in. And so I think in that sense, I'm very glad to have written it. There's a way in which I feel like I've moved through a passage of experience that this is the I mean, I guess maybe more for a fiction writer than a nonfiction writer, although I don't know how much of yourself through Larry Kramer you might find. But that there is...
Another session.
That's another session. I'll come back and do that
My
one.
psychiatrist.
Yeah. But I think, I did... I think I sort of was able to work through things, to put it directly, that I'm glad to have done. Yeah.
And so can you then read the novel as something of your own past that you're not enthralled to still?
I think,
psychologically?
yeah, in some ways, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, and thank you particularly for... Thank you particularly for being so wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam and Bill. And Adam, we're confidently expecting your next book to reference MUSC in Charleston. Thank you all. Particularly thank you to our sponsors, Photios Pansasis, Rodney and the Rodney B. and Marjorie S. Fink Foundation. Adam will be at the bookstall, and you probably all know by now how to access that. Go through the back, and you'll find him there. You may get there before he does. And one more round of thanks.
Thank you.